Hello everyone, I'm Adam Steele for the Hot Pulse Studios. If you've not met me before, then hello, welcome to the channel. If you've seen some of my videos, welcome back. This is going to be a short series of videos where we're going to talk about the new Celestion Impulse Responses that Celestion have released. So this is quite a technical topic, and I'm going to try and aim this as much as I can at guitarists rather than engineers, because a lot of engineers already know what impulse responses are. A lot of engineers will already be familiar with them. So it starts at the start. What is an impulse response? So this boils down to kind of new methods of recording, because it's a well-known fact that guitar amplifiers are loud, and to get a great sound out of them, they usually need to be even more loud, which means that if you're going to record something, or if you want to practice at home and you want a really great kind of guitar tone, there's no real way to do it without upsetting the neighbours, waking the baby, and generally kind of getting people very angry and also making yourself deaf. So there are all sorts of things where real speakers are not the best solution, and that's where the impulse response thing comes in. They're usually called IRs because it's easier to say than impulse response. It's quite a mouthful. But if you're going to record using silent recording, you need to have several pieces in place. First thing you need is a guitar, obviously. Then you need a DI box, a direct injection box, or an interface with an inbuilt DI system. There's one I've got right over here. This is the Audient ID4. This thing's got an inbuilt DI on channel 2, so if you're recording through this, you just pick channel 2, plug your guitar in, and off you go. The other option is a big fat thing that I've got down there, which I plug the guitar into, and then that goes into the interface on a computer. There are several options. You can use something like an Axe Effects unit, or a Kemper, or so many different digital systems now. Or you can even use something like a real head that's with a load box. So if you're using a real amp head, like say a real Marshall Plexi, you can use a load box that will take all the power from the amp that would otherwise make the thing explode because it's got nowhere to go. That load box would take all the power and would give you a usable sound to work with. The downside to that is that the output of a guitar head on its own, it sounds like a bag of bees. It sounds absolutely awful. Now, if I give you an example, this, let's just use a Vox AC30 with no cabinet. This is roughly what it would sound like. Now, if you're going for that kind of mid-60s Rolling Stones kind of thing for that kind of tape distortion tone, that's fine, that's cool. But for most of us, that is not acceptable. So that's the guitar head covered, but we need a cabinet and a speaker, because what the cabinet and speaker do is they treat the sound, whether they were meant to originally or not. It turned out that as guitar recording evolved, the cabinet and the speaker have a massive bearing on how the whole setup sounds. And the right speaker matched with the right cabinet matched with the right amp can be the difference between a grating sound, a dull sound, something that gets lost in the mix or is piercing, and something that's absolutely perfect. So that's where a virtual cabinet comes in. Now, there have been some systems, some virtual cabinet systems, where it roughly tries to kind of digitally emulate a speaker and a microphone in a cabinet. And in my opinion, none of them have ever sounded any good. They're all a bit of a kind of a wishy-washy, kind of muddy attempt. But what an impulse response does, what an IR is, it's a capture of a real cabinet with a real speaker in it and a real microphone. Now, using a bit of kind of physics magic, what we do is we learn this from guys who were capturing reverbs of real spaces. Something that, well, it's called convolution reverb, and they use impulse responses for that. So this is a technique that was learned where if you walk into, I don't know, the Taj Mahal and you go, it's not just going to be one click. It's going to go because that little impulse and that click is what we call the impulse, triggers this whole big reverb thing, which is the response. So it's kind of a call and response, impulse, response. And that's how it was originally done for making these realistic reverbs that you could use in computer systems. I mean, that system's come a long way now. That's really kind of sounding great. But we worked out a while ago that if you can do that for a reverb space, why can't you do that with something else that's like a guitar cabinet? So it was kind of worked on, and through a few tweaks, and instead of doing it with a clap, we kind of do it with a sine wave sweep. So if you see anyone capturing impulse responses, it kind of goes up into the stratosphere. That's the way to capture a really short sound, because the way that the speaker responds evolves over a short amount of time, and that's what a big part of what makes a guitar cabinet a realistic kind of tone, rather than just putting an EQ on and hoping for the best. And if you see some older guitar amps that have got kind of a recording out, all it is, it's a filter on the output of the head, so it just sounds like the awful bit that I just played you, but just kind of with some of the top end removed. It's still terrible. So some kind of studios and homebrewers started working on running these impulse responses through cabinets, and found that if you put a microphone in a particular place on the cabinet, it kind of freezes in time that setup. So you'd use kind of the cleanest solid state power amp you could get so that it doesn't affect the tone, because you've already got the sound of a tube head, right? You don't want to double that up. So you use the cleanest power amp you can. You run the guitar cabinet with the speaker that you picked, obviously, with a certain microphone in a certain place, and that then becomes captured as one impulse response file. And that is then loaded into an impulse response loader. So behind me, I have on the left my virtual amp, just to keep things simple. So in this case, let's say I've got the Vox AC30 that I was using before. Kind of sounds like this. Now let's turn on Kazrog's Recabinet, which is my impulse response loader. Now I've got these Celestion impulse responses because Celestion themselves have decided that, hey, if kind of studios are doing this, why don't we use our own speakers and make this the best that we can make it in a kind of a layout that makes sense. So that's something I'll talk about in a minute, is a layout that makes sense. So let's say that we were using Celestion's Alnico Blues in a 2x12 closed back with a Shure SM57 with a balanced tone. So I just went through all the folders, and I'll talk about this. I'll make separate videos for clean tone, classic rock, and metal, and kind of different cabinets for different purposes. But I've now loaded that in, and instead of the cabinet sounding like absolute death, it should sound like something altogether more useful. And that is the difference there between no cabinet and using an impulse response, because I've picked a microphone that we'd usually use on the same kind of setup that you'd use with a Vox AC30, which is the head that I've picked, which would be a 2x12 with the Alnico Blues. Or I could pick the Celestion G12M Greenbacks, which are in some AC30s, and I can start comparing the two. So there's another benefit. Now this I've got coming out of these speakers here, and this sounds like a gunned AC30 at the kind of volume that's not absolutely smashing my ears. Now, if I turn the speakers off and plug some headphones in, it still sounds about as close to the real amp as you're going to get without having a deafening amp in front of you. So all the advantages of the silent recording are now here. I could record in a bedroom and not have someone on the next wall like telling me to shut up, and I can still have that. that kind of rich, realistic tone. Now, there are all sorts of different presentations here, but the way that Celestion have laid it out is the next thing I'm going to talk about, where some manufacturers of these impulse responses will just give you one file and say, this is it. Or they'll give you something that's really simple and say, this is sound 1, this is sound 2, this is sound 3. And that's fine. But then other manufacturers have gone so far the other way that they kind of think like engineers think, where they've gone, it's this cabinet with this microphone at this position, this far away from the cab. And that can be too much because you end up with thousands of these impulse files. And unless you in your head know exactly which microphone you want to pick, say they give you a choice of 15 mics, how do you know what they all sound like? And it's option paralysis, it can take you forever. So let's look at what Celestion have given us, because they've given us 3 microphones per cabinet type, per speaker type, a room mic, and some ready-made combinations. And that's it. Nice and simple. So let's have a look at that now. Okay, so I'm looking at my computer screen now. I'm going to keep this AC30 with some real crunch on it because it's kind of harder to hear what's going on with a really super clean tone, but with that extra grit we can probably pick out some more differences. So, let's have a look. So, I got loads and loads. This on the left is Kazrog's Vocal 30, which is essentially an AC30, but it's in the non-top boost. So I've got a little bit of gain going. Tone's backed off quite a lot because otherwise it'll just get nasty. So it's got that kind of definite rock and roll thing going on. Now, let's have a look. So let's hide that away. This is re-cabinet, and these, if we ignore cabinet 2 for a second, this is just cabinet 1 because I've turned this off. Let's keep it simple and just go with 1. So these are extra controls to come to later, but the most important thing is picking the right speaker. So we've got the Celestion Blue, the Alnico Blue, the Greenback, Creamback's the G12H Anniversary, which is essentially the Jimi Hendrix speaker, and the G1265 and Vintage 30, which are more kind of rock and roll and metal. So for this, let's look at for the Celestion Blue, let's say we bought the whole pack for the Celestion Blue. So we have the 1x12 enclosed and open back, 2x12 enclosed and open, and a 4x12 which is only a closed back. It's very unusual to see a 4x12 with an open back. I think I've seen Mason make a half and half, but I've never actually seen a full open back. I'm sure they exist. Someone will say, but this exists. So in the meantime, let's say we were using a small speaker set, so a 1x12 closed back. Let's say we were using a small cab with this. So in there is another folder. We've got different sample rates to pick. You didn't have to download all the sample rates, but depending on the client I quite often work with some weird and wonderful sample rates. Today I'm working at 44.1, which it says up here. So I'm just going to stick with that and go with 44.1. You can technically use different ones with the wrong sample rate, but just be careful because some impulse loaders, I'm using Kazrog's re-cabinet today, but there are alternatives, like there's Poulen's Le Cab, there's Wall of Sound by 2 Notes, which you can add user impulses into. There are loads of different ones, and I'm sure across the internet, you guys in the comments are going to say, oh, but this one's better, that one's better, this one's better. And they all work well to a point. This one's got this extra function, which I use a lot, called speaker dynamics, which makes it a little more lively. We're not going to use that today for these videos, just because we want to keep this plain and simple. Now, inside there's 200 millisecond and 500 millisecond folders. I think the reason for this is that some hardware like the Kemper or apps like that, they only can handle a 200 millisecond impulse response. So in my mind, the longer one is better. But if you're hardware can't handle it, Celestion have already provided you with the option, so you don't have to go back to them and go, this doesn't work. You can just get on with it, and there you go. So in here, there are 4 folders and a load of separate files. So the 4 folders, one is for room microphones. So let's go with the Celestion Blue on a 112 closeback and just listen to the room microphone. So this is what happens when you put a condenser mic far back in the room. You get this kind of sound. So that sounds a little bit boxy, quite roomy. I quite often find that this kind of thing can help an extra backing part maybe sit back in a mix and not interfere. So then we've got 3 microphones. Now, back to camera 1. So the 3 microphones that they've given you. One is a Shure SM57, which is one of these. I'm sure if you're a guitarist, you'll have seen these. A lot of engineers use these, a lot of guitarists use these. It's pretty much bread and butter for rock, metal, classic rock, even a lot of clean stuff. They do a job, nice and simple. That's one of the options that Celestion have given us. Another one is the Sennhiser 421, one of these big bad beasts. These have got quite a big fat tone, which if you mix that in with an SM57, kind of gives you a kind of what a lot of people call kind of a golden tone. And then, one that I don't have, but I wish I did, they're rather expensive, but I might get one in the future, is the Royer R121 ribbon. And that ribbon has such a kind of a big, warm, present sound that it's absolutely beautiful, and it can really counteract a certain harshness that you get from the other 2 microphones. So let's check them out. So if we look in the SM57 folder, there are a few choices in here. Instead of giving us kind of half an inch from the carb and this kind of that, they're quite simple. It's balanced, bright, dark, more dark, fat and thin. So let's start with the balanced sound. So that's, if I grab a pick. Sounds good to me. It's quite spiky, quite bitey, quite present. It's got that kind of low end thing going on that if you've got headphones, that'll be kind of rattling your ears a little. So then there's bright, dark, more dark, fat, and thin. And there's a lot less bass in the thin one, which means that that one might, for example, fit better in a mix if you were kind of doing an extra part, like kind of... You know, something single line, something that you don't want to interfere in the mix with other parts. Next up is the Sennhiser 421, which if we choose the balanced one, it's quite a focused kind of sound. Then there's the bright, dark, fat, thin. The Royer 121, if we pick the balanced one, this should be quite bassy and warm. And that can be, I like a dark ribbon, so I'd go with dark too. And maybe I'd mix that in with the extra cabinet, which is here, and then I'd maybe pick an SM57 or something like that. If your impulse loader that you're using doesn't have the ability to blend more than one in, that's where if we go up a folder, these ones come in because we've got a mix where you can just load a single file in, and Celestion have decided how much of each speaker you should be using. Keeps it simple. So for me, let's say this is a high gain sound. Celestion Blue 112, and it's that Royal 121 plus the SM57. So that's those two together, and that should be... nice and fat with plenty of bite. The one below it is a 421 and the 57, which is more the kind of standard rock tone. Then we've got the 421 and the ribbon. And then we've got all of them. It's quite a nice blend. And then we've got all of them plus the room mic in mono or stereo. So if you've got a stereo impulse loader, you can now have a stereo sound. So let's try that. That extra kind of roominess on there does add a certain something. Let's just go to the neck pickup and just coil split this and just... See, that's kind of where it's high gain. They've probably moved the mics away from the brightness. If I move that to the low gain settings, which are exactly the same but probably with a slightly different mic placement. And that was all the choices on one speaker type, on one cabinet type as well, because if I try the same tone, so flicking through, so low gain all plus room with the open back, the only thing that's changed there is the cabinet now is an open back. And we can hear how it's a very different kind of tonality because it's a very different cab. And in the upcoming videos, I'm going to be looking at different speakers for different applications based on kind of what well-known guys use. I mean, that's what these are all for, as well as an extra added dimension is each speaker that you buy, they're quite expensive. Let's say a nominal value, you're talking between £100 and £200 for a speaker. Which means, especially for the Celestion Blues, if they're about 200 quid a speaker, for a 4x12, that's £800 just for the speakers. I mean, if you're committed and you know what speakers you like, that's what you should do. But this is a great tool because these cost a lot less for you to be able to switch between the speakers and find what works for you through rigorous testing. You can keep flicking between these. And they're not free, they have some cost associated, but compared to buying a whole new set of speakers, breaking them in, deciding you don't like them, selling them for less than you paid for them, and then buying the next set again and again and again, you can just buy these once, use them for recording if you want, either until you can use the real thing in a real situation, or just ongoing, you can just use these. A lot of guys using things like Axe Effects will use impulse responses on big name albums, and no one can tell the difference, arguably. That's something for another day. But the other thing that I must mention before we close this video and then look at more specifics is that people are going to be asking, well, what brand of cabinets are these guys using? So I asked the same question. I asked Celestion's guys myself, and they said to me that they had all of these cabinets custom built for them. These are kind of generic cabinets that are made as well as they could be, but they didn't want to drag brand into it. They wanted to make sure that you were getting kind of the best cabinet they felt they could make with the Celestion sound. So if you have a particular cabinet type that you like, this isn't quite that kind of set and thinking. But if you know that a great, well-built, say 4x12 with this kind of speaker in, with this kind of microphone on, would work for you, but you don't have a soundproof room, or you just don't have the ability to make the noise, or you want to change your mind and just keep flicking through until you find something you like, this really is a great way to go. Full disclosure, Celestion have sent me these impulse responses to try and to demonstrate for you, so I'm not trying to pull the wool over your eyes. I've just got to be completely honest with you. That way you can't then turn around and say, oh, well, he never told us. So, yes, big thank you to Celestion for letting me show these to everybody. But we're going to do more videos now. So I'm going to do one that is about what I would use for a clean tone, one that I'd use for classic rock, one that I'd use for metal and kind of gent. And I'll be changing different speaker types and different cab types, because I've found through messing with real Celestion cabs, and you'll see in some of the videos that I've done comparing, say, 412, 212, 1x12, that video I'll link in the description, and comparing different speakers in different cabinets. I've been surprised time after time with what I thought I would find, and I'm quite lucky in the respect that I've got this soundproof room and I've been able to get these cabinets and these speakers, but you can save yourself a lot of time and a lot of messing around by getting a hold of these. Get an impulse loader if you don't already have one. Get yourself either a virtual head or something like an amp that's got a preamp record out or an effects send, or something like one of these. This is an ADA MP1 tube preamp. There's also the Marshall JMP1 or the Mesa Boogie Triaxis. If you want real tubes for your guitar pre, this is the way to do it, because this is real tube tone that can then be sent out to an impulse response loader, because this thing has speaker emulation in the back, but this thing's from the early 90s, and that speaker emulation is absolutely awful. So if you want to bring this back to life or anything like that, and some of the guitar head emulations are really getting good now. It's been the cabinets that have been letting them down to this point. Check it out. Get yourself an interface if you don't already have one, and have a play, because it'll save you time, it'll save you money, and hopefully you'll have a lot better time playing. You'll be happy when you're practicing, because you'll get kind of that amp sound that you were looking for, and this will all round be a big win for you. Thanks for watching. I'm Adam Steele for the Hot Pulse Studios. Please give us a like, that really helps, and hit the subscribe button, because we've got a lot more content coming for you and we want you all to see it, so please subscribe, it really helps us. If you want to help us out even more, consider checking out our Patreon campaign, which I'm going to link here, and we'll hope to see you in the next video. See you soon.